Have you ever wondered why, even though you were considered an intelligent, promising, even genius child, today you feel like someone who has failed? You look back and see awards, praise, impressed teachers, proud parents. But now, as an adult, what do you see? Frustration? Stagnation? An almost physical sensation of having disappointed not only others, but yourself. If you feel this way, this video is for you. And no, you are not alone. The truth is harsh, but it needs to be said. The world was not made for brilliant people. It was made for functional people. And being functional is very different from being talented. When you were a child, your quick mind, sharp perception, and extraordinary creativity seemed like gifts. But now, it feels like all of that has become a burden, as if that immense potential has turned into a weight you carry silently every day, without knowing exactly where you went wrong along the way. You feel that you could have done more, been more, created more. And maybe that's true. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is what was expected of you, what you were promised, what you believed you would be? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said, "The greater the intelligence, the deeper the pain." And maybe now you are starting to understand what he meant. Because being intelligent is realizing what others do not see, including the mediocrity of the world around you. It's feeling that you think too much, feel too much, understand too much, but act too little. Because a sharp mind paralyzes. It questions everything, it doubts itself. And in that process, while others just move on, you freeze, and you start to wonder, where did that spark go? Why do I feel so lost now? This video is not a moral lesson. It's not empty motivation. It's a direct conversation with the part of you that is tired of pretending everything is fine. Here, we will face the pain of someone who grew up hearing they were special, but now feels they have not lived up to that. We will use Schopenhauer as a philosophical guide to understand why this happens and how it is possible to reclaim something from this internal chaos. Because it's not about recovering the prodigy you once were. It's about finally understanding the adult you have become. If you've made it this far, it's because this pain belongs to you. So stay. You deserve to hear what you were never told. Your talent has not disappeared. It has only been suffocated by expectations that were never yours to begin with. Since early on, you learned that being intelligent was not just a characteristic, it was an identity. You were the special one, the above average, the one who would go far. Remember? It wasn't just about getting good grades or learning quickly. It was the way adults looked at you as if they saw something rare, almost magical. Every word you spoke became a source of pride. Every achievement, a prophecy being fulfilled. But what no one told you, perhaps because they didn't even know, is that along with these compliments came an invisible prison. A label that looked beautiful on the outside, but was corrosive on the inside. Being called a genius at 8 years old may seem like a gift, but by 30, it can turn into a curse. The problem with being recognized too early is that it conditions your worth to your performance. You are no longer just a child, you are the prodigy. And this title comes with a silent contract. You need to keep impressing, always. Because if you stop, if you stumble, if you fail, then you weren't that much of a prodigy after all. And this idea haunts you. You began to internalize that your worth lies in delivering exceptional results. That you only deserve love, respect, and admiration if you continue to be brilliant. And this made you grow up with a constant fear, the fear of disappointing. And this fear, contrary to what they say, didn't push you forward. It paralyzed you. It made you procrastinate, sabotage opportunities, postpone projects. Because when all that is expected of you is genius, any movement feels insufficient. You were taught to be extraordinary, But no one taught you to be human. And the cruelest part of it all is that this label doesn't stop in time. It seeps into adulthood. Now you are no longer the prodigy, but rather the disappointment. And you feel ashamed for not having made it. You avoid family gatherings, ignore former teachers, flee from comparisons with peers who weren't that smart, but who now have their lives more together than yours. Arthur Schopenhauer, with his dark yet honest view of existence, saw this suffering as inevitable. For him, the world is indifferent to individual brilliance. The blind will to live drags us in search of satisfaction, but the more aware we are, the more we realize the futility of it all. What for others is just passing frustration, for you is almost an existential anguish, because you didn't just want to live well. You wanted your life to have meaning, an impact, a greatness. But the real world doesn't work that way. And the more you realize this, the more it seems that something in you is slowly dying. And then comes the inevitable question: if all of this is true, if talent guarantees nothing, then what really drives us? What makes someone continue to seek even when everything seems meaningless? The answer may lie in what Schopenhauer called will, a blind impulse that commands us, but which, for the gifted, takes on a distorted form. And that is what we will explore in the next part. Because perhaps what you call failure is not your failure, but rather the result of a silent struggle against a will that was never yours. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Schopenhauer said that human beings are governed by an irrational and unconscious force, the will to live. But contrary to what many think, this will is not guided by reason, logic, or the desire for happiness. It is blind, incessant, and cruel. It simply wants. It wants to exist. It wants to continue. It wants to assert itself. It wants more. For the average person, this will manifest in mundane desires, comfort, status, survival. But for the gifted mind, it takes on a much more complex and self-destructive form: the will to be extraordinary. You have been conditioned from an early age not just to live, but to justify your existence. While others went through life without deep questioning, you grew up with a sense of urgency. How will I prove that I am what they expect of me? How will I turn my talent into something grand, something that leaves a mark? And this drive, this desire for transcendence, began to consume you from within. It became an obsession. Yet reality rarely rewards depth. The world is fast, shallow, and merciless to those who think too much. The talent that once set you apart has now become your prison. You can't start a project without wanting it to be perfect. You can't accept a simple life without feeling like a failure. You can't act without first freezing under the weight of all the expectations, real or imagined, that have been placed on your shoulders. This will to be extraordinary is a distortion of the original will. Schopenhauer saw suffering as inevitable precisely because the more awareness you have of life, the more you realize how marked it is by frustration and helplessness. And if you're someone with high intellect, this realization is even more painful. You see the emptiness in social goals, in the pursuit of success, in the promises of happiness. But even seeing it, you can't simply free yourself, because the will still drives you. It demands that you do something great, even if you are sinking in silence. And the more you fail to reach that ideal, the further you drift away from yourself. Talent becomes a curse. Awareness becomes pain. And the mind that was once a source of admiration becomes your worst enemy. You enter a cycle, You feel you need to create something grand to justify your existence, but the weight of that demand paralyzes you. And when you don't deliver, you feel guilt, shame, self-contempt, and then it all starts over again. This internal, silent, and corrosive dynamic is what leads so many gifted adults to a chronic state of dissatisfaction, procrastination, and self-sabotage. Not because they are lazy or disorganized, but because they have been taught to never accept anything less than genius. But what happens when that ideal crumbles? When talent does not bear fruit? When reality does not match what was envisioned? What happens to those who were trained to be special but find no place in the world? It is at this point that everything begins to fall apart. Because the next collapse will not only be external, it will be internal. And this is what we will discuss in the next part, the moment when the identity built around talent begins to crumble and the adult finds themselves lost within their own mind. When a child grows up hearing that they are brilliant, talented, different from others, they don't just build self-esteem, they build an entire identity on that. And here lies the danger. Everything that is built exclusively on external recognition, on others' expectations, is destined to crumble. Because the real world, the adult world, rarely confirms that narrative. You enter adulthood believing that talent will open doors, that your intelligence will be enough. That genius by itself will attract opportunities, success, and admiration. But then you realize that the market doesn't care about brilliant ideas, it wants productivity. That companies don't value depth, they prefer efficiency. That relationships are not built on refined logic, but on emotional availability, patience, and presence. And suddenly, what was your differentiator becomes irrelevant, or worse, a nuisance. And that's when the silent collapse begins. The adult who was a prodigy looks around and realizes they don't fit in, that the world no longer recognizes them, that the applause has ceased, that no one is expecting anything from them anymore. And that should be liberating, but it's devastating. Because if no one expects anything from you anymore, what is left? Who are you without the label? What remains when you are no longer the brilliant child, but just another among millions trying to pay bills, deal with pressures, survive? The identity built around talent dissipates like smoke, and what emerges in its place is a deep existential void, a crisis that has no name but that you feel every day. It's the discomfort upon waking, chronic procrastination, apathy disguised as distraction. It's the constant feeling of falling short, of having been left behind, of not living the life you should be living. Schopenhauer understood this with brutal clarity. For him, the higher an individual's intellect, the more isolated and frustrated they tend to be. Because they see more clearly the misery of existence, the banality of human achievements, the superficiality of social relationships. They perceive the abyss, and the abyss looks back. That's why so many gifted adults enter cycles of self-deprecation, anxiety, and depression. It's not because they are weak, it's because they are too lucid to deceive themselves with the illusions that keep others functioning. But the pain doesn't come only from disappointment with the world. It comes primarily from the internal rupture, when you realize that you no longer know who you are, that everything that defined you has lost its meaning, that the brilliance has turned into shadow. That's when the collapse happens. And it's at this point that many ask themselves, why does the world seem to ignore the intelligent? Why? The more I understand, the more invisible I become. If talent was everything, why does it now seem worthless? The answer lies in society's disdain for depth. And that is exactly what we will reveal in the next part. Why society prefers to ignore the brilliant, and how this further fuels the frustration cycle of those who were trained to be extraordinary. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. Link is in the pinned comment. The pain of those who are child prodigies lies not only in personal failure, it is in the collective silence that accompanies their fall, an uncomfortable, almost cruel silence, as if the world has simply forgotten that you were once called a genius. But have they really forgotten? Or did they never truly care? The truth is uncomfortable. The world does not value genius when it does not serve a practical, immediate, profitable purpose. Intelligence by itself does not move people. Deep thinking does not go viral. Intellectual sensitivity does not sell. We live in a society that celebrates performance, not perception, that rewards obedience, not lucidity, that prefers the mediocre competent to the unstable brilliant. And here lies one of the most devastating aspects of Schopenhauer's philosophy. He claimed that the greater the degree of an individual's consciousness, the more isolated they become. This is because they begin to see clearly what others avoid at all costs: the emptiness of social conventions, the artificiality of relationships, the stupidity disguised as optimism. The lucid being sees too much and thus disturbs. They disrupt the collective comfort with questions that no one wants to answer. They expose truths that others prefer to keep buried. You have not been forgotten. You have been silenced, because your intelligence reflects what others do not want to see in themselves: their limitations, their illusions, their comfortable mediocrity. Society does not reject talent. It rejects the discomfort that talent causes, because every brilliant mind is a dangerous mirror. And that is why so many gifted adults feel invisible, ignored, irrelevant, not because they have lost their value, but because they were never truly seen, only used as symbols of potential, as momentary trophies, as projections of others' expectations. Schopenhauer goes further and states, social recognition is rarely aligned with true depth. What stands out in the world is not the wisest, but the most convenient. It is not what thinks, but what entertains. And this explains why so many who shone in childhood disappear in adulthood. They did not learn to play the game, and honestly, perhaps they shouldn't have. But the price is high. You start to doubt yourself, to think that perhaps you overestimated yourself, that maybe you really wasted everything. And this doubt is one of the worst tortures for those who are trained to validate themselves through recognition. Because when the world ignores you, the mind screams, "Then I really failed." But did you really fail? Or did you just place your hope in the wrong place? Perhaps the problem is not your talent. Perhaps the problem is expecting the world to value you the same way it projected you in your childhood. And this leads us to a new question. If recognition does not come from outside, where should it come from? How can an intelligent, frustrated person find meaning again without depending on social validation? This is where the turning point begins. And this is what we will discover in the next part. Why the way out is not to shine again, but to understand what truly moves you from within, and how to transform that pain into wisdom. If you've made it this far, you've already realized this isn't about becoming that prodigious child again. That would be impossible, and honestly, it would be useless. Because what hurt you wasn't just the fall from talent, but the fact that your entire identity was built on something that couldn't stand on its own. Shining was a consequence. But you were taught to believe it was the only path. And now, As an adult, the emptiness of that illusion consumes you. This is where many seek desperate solutions. Courses, therapies, elaborate plans, radical life changes. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to change. But changing without understanding is just repeating the same pain with a different mask. What you need is not a new plan, it's a new perspective. Schopenhauer offers that shift. He said that life, by nature, is suffering, but not as a punishment, rather as an intrinsic condition of existence. Expecting life to reward us for being intelligent is like expecting the sea to treat us better because we know how to swim. The sea doesn't care. Life doesn't either. But that doesn't mean everything is futile. It means that meaning isn't out there. It's in how you interpret what you experience. Your pain is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of clarity. You see the world as it is, limited, superficial, indifferent to depth. And yes, that isolates, but it also liberates. Because once you understand that you no longer need to meet anyone's expectations, not even your childhood expectations, you begin to rebuild your life on new ground, the ground of authenticity. The solution isn't in proving your worth, it's in stopping the negotiation of it. You no longer need to be brilliant to feel worthy. You need to be honest. You need to recognize that the desire to impress, to achieve something extraordinary, is no longer yours. It was placed in you by a system that turns talent into product and soul into performance. But you are no longer a product. You are someone who has survived their own mythology, and that in itself is already an immense strength. From this point on, the focus is no longer on brilliance, it's on clarity. Clarity about what you feel, about what truly matters, about what is worth keeping and what needs to be left behind. You won't find this in conventional success. You'll find it in conscious solitude, in the silent search for meaning, in the radical acceptance of who you are, without masks, without poses, without the need to be extraordinary. And it is in this space that true transformation begins. When you stop chasing recognition and start looking inward. When the focus shifts from what the world expects of me to what I expect from the world. When the mind, previously suffocated by unattainable goals, finds peace in the simplicity of existing with purpose. But this purpose, of course, doesn't arise from nothing. It needs to be built. It needs to be cultivated. And the inevitable question now is, how? How can someone who feels lost, disconnected, begin to rebuild their life in a genuine way? This is what we will reveal in the final part. How the pain that brought you here can, in fact, be the starting point for a new way of living. Freer, deeper, and finally, at peace with who you truly are. Maybe you've never said this out loud, but you feel that something inside you has been buried. That spark that once made your eyes shine, that made you think, create, imagine, dream, seems to have gone out, and the world moved on. No one stopped to ask how you feel now. No one asked what happened to that talent, that passion, that potential that everyone saw in you. It was just you left there, trying to piece together the fragments of a promise that was never fulfilled. But here's the truth, that almost no one has the courage to say, it wasn't you who failed. It was the narrative. It was the lie sold that being smart was enough. That talent was destiny, that the world would embrace your genius with open arms. And now that this lie has fallen, what remains is the hardest part. Facing yourself without the adornments of the past, without the labels, without the expectations, just you, raw, real, human. And this is a disguised gift. Because when talent falls silent, the truth can finally speak. The truth that you are more than a result, more than a grade, a diploma, a compliment, a promising future that never materialized. You are someone who survived the pressure to be extraordinary and who now has the chance to be authentic, to live a life that doesn't seek to prove anything to anyone, but that is lived with presence, with intention, with depth. Arthur Schopenhauer said that suffering is inevitable, but it is precisely that which pushes us toward a more conscious life. When you stop resisting pain and start listening to it, it transforms, not into comfort, but into clarity. And that clarity is the first step toward freedom. You no longer need to be extraordinary. You just need to be whole. And now, I want to hear from you. What did this video awaken in you? Did you recognize yourself in any part? Have you been living with this feeling of silent frustration? Share in the comments. Sometimes, putting into words what is suffocating inside is already an act of liberation. And you can be sure, many people are going through the same, and your comment could be what someone needed to read today. And if this message touched you, confronted you, or helped you see your own story with new eyes, then don't stop here. The next video is an important continuation of this process. It will take you even deeper. And if you are ready for that, watch it, because it is in this sequence that the true turning point begins. See you there.